Hey everyone, it's Joe Glines here in Dallas, and my colleague,
Jackie here from Denmark. So great.
and we're having our short talks, which aren't always short, but about basically automating and using mostly AutoHotkey with automating. Today's topic, we were going to talk about what's AutoHotkey not good for, right? What it's not best in class at doing and stuff. It does a lot of great things, right? But there's some things it's not good for. First off, is the one that makes me laugh, is like, using anything on a Mac, right? Or Linux, because you're stuck on Windows. But if you're already stuck on Windows, you know that it's a benefit, right? But actually, it's funny because a fair amount of people will ask me, "Oh, like, hey, I like how you did that. Yeah, how do I do that?" I'm like, "What, are you running Windows?" "No, I'm on a Mac." "Oh, sorry, yeah, you're screwed."
Yeah, and that's maybe one of the things. And I'd say when I started using AutoHotkey, some 5-7 years, something like that.
It's been at least, because you and I have been talking for 3 years now, roughly.
Yeah.
And
I think I keep saying that I started in February 12 or something like that. So it's just about 7 years. So and now, with how my company, at least, and with me moving away from actually crunching data per se, the solutions that's needed are more and more becoming cross-platform. So I can see the dilemma with Windows only, or with AutoHotkey being stuck in Windows. Because more and more people just expect things to work on whatever device they have. But yeah, it is a thing with AutoHotkey being Windows only.
Yeah. But again, Windows has what, 93% of the market, somewhere in there. I mean, it's
on desktop at least, right?
Yeah,
and that's the important part. So and that's why I'm mentioning that for a company that's looking for a solution that their employees can use on any device, they are, of course, that's a different matter. But to crunch stuff on whatever task that people have at hand, it still excels there.
Well, actually, the way you just rephrased that, though, I think it's a really valid point. In my head, I was thinking much more along the lines of using a Windows versus a Mac or something else. But the way you just rephrased it, like a tablet, or a phone, right, is where people are using a lot of stuff these days. And that is actually getting a much bigger, it's not just desktops, right? It's everything people are using. That's a really excellent point.
Yeah.
The next one for me is thinking about, which is hard to explain to some people when you talk about, oh, what do you do for the, I automate things. Oh, so like, automating, this and this, like a list on a no, it's not server based, it's desktop based, right? It's I don't set up seed lists and automate doing stuff on the web and connecting services, although I can connect to services, right, with the APIs, which we discussed last week in web scraping. But it's for the most part, it's just, run on a desktop. Although, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't there some sort of AutoHotkey script out there that's running a server? Does that sound familiar?
I think that some people have over time done different types of stuff, and I know that there was an AutoHotkey server at one point, and of course people have made the server and client type stuff, and talking through sockets and other type of stuff like that. So there isn't really a limitation there, but again, with the way and what servers need today, with speed and other kinds of interactions with other things, AutoHotkey is just not the best suited, and that's fair enough.
Yeah, having said that, though, like, you can do some interesting ways, like especially if you have Dropbox installed, or you can leave your computer running and monitoring a folder, and then it can still do stuff, not the same exact way as a server, but it can still. You can have it go check an API and go pull in data, and then go automate another API, right, if you leave your computer on, right? It's just, it's not.
I have an example of at work where I had a manager or whatever you call that, and she wanted to go in and make herself an extra copy of a file area. We already had backup going, but she wanted one for her own whatever peace of mind. And I was like, yeah, but when do we want it to run? Every Friday at noon or something like that. Okay, but I can easily set something up for you, but please keep in mind that only if you're actually on your computer will this work. Yeah, but I'm not there every Friday. And yeah, that's the limitation. Okay, and she was a little hard pressed to see that if you made a program, it wasn't actually able to run at a specific time if it didn't actually have a CPU to work with or whatever you call that. Because people are just used to web services doing whatever they ask them to at whatever time. And she's much more into Outlook and stuff like that, but she has no idea that there's actually an Excel server, not Excel, Exchange server in the background doing all of the actual heavy lift of distributing tasks and stuff like that. So, yeah.
No, that's a great point, right? I mean, and it's like I said, I find it painful trying to explain to some people the difference between desktop automation and what they think of a marketing automation type things. And it's generally, you can still find ways to work around it, right? But again, you have to leave, and it's no different than the other one. It's just the other case, the servers are always up, right, or hopefully up, right? It's just you have to leave your computer on, and for most people, it depends where you are. People are like, oh, that's okay, but if someone's running from a laptop and they travel, right, then you have some issues.
Yeah, and that's the exact thing here, right, where the laptop or the personal computer is actually something that you bring with you. So if you're in the office, you have it there, and if you're working at home or if you're at a meeting or whatever, you'd actually shut it down completely and take it with you, and you might have it at home for the entire weekend or your day off or whatever. So yeah, of course, it's a small issue when coming to wanting something to run at a specific time of day, continuously every week, whatever. But yeah, she accepted the limitation. It's fine.
Yeah. And then there's, of course, dealing with multi-threading, right? With an AutoHotkey, you can correct. I want you. Let me say this, and you correct me where I screw up. The general AutoHotkey L, it's not necessarily multi-threading, but you can fake it pretty darn close by using timers. Is that right?
Yeah, and I'd say for new users at least that are coming in, they're very stumped by it not being able to multi-thread. It's just something that apparently humans expect something to be able to do. So if I click this hotkey and it's going in this loop over here, it's doing that, and I click this hotkey over here. Why can't it do both at the same time? It should be able to. I've programmed it to do both at the same time, but that's just not how a single-threaded thing like AutoHotkey does. It will make one loop and then hit a sleep, and then it will do the next thing until it sleeps and then continue like that, and simply share the resources or the one thread, the one main thing that's actually making it run. And with timers, of course, instead of actually waiting, the timer will do the routine and then the next one and then the next one, and they'll simply be queued after each other, and it will seem as if it's actually doing multiple things, but it's still just running from one end to the other.
And that's where I think it is a little confusing, because there's that setting of threads that you can, put different numbers, right, to account for, but it's still not quite multi-threading.
No, and the thing is that AutoHotkey can per se start multiple threads. You can actually tell it to start here, and then tell it to start there again, and this one will go down here and halt for this one to get to the same point, and then this one will continue on until it ends, and then this one will continue. But at the same time, only one thread is actually running. So
Gotcha.
you could,
Yeah.
it would perhaps feel like you had multiple threads, and the setting like set max hotkeys per thread is that each time you press the hotkey, you're telling it to actually start from the beginning again. But the flow is here, and until that flow is sleeping or whatever it is, nothing will still happen, even though you've allowed it. It will just queue it and wait.
Mm-hmm. And then though with AutoHotkey H from Hotkey, right? That apparently does handle multi-threading. And I know in the webinar we did with him, he demonstrated it a little bit, and so you can with that version, which is and actually just real quickly. So when I took a dive into Python and was playing with it, that was one thing I was doing web scraping, and I was generally speaking, like I don't have a need for multi-threading. Right. It sounds cool, but I really don't need the need. But I'll tell you, when I was doing some web scraping with Python and I went out and got like 1,000, ticker prices for stocks at the same time, and it sent them all out and then kept track of each one coming back in. It was lightning fast because it wasn't doing one waiting, doing one waiting, doing one waiting. Right. It was for that case, Python was amazing, right? Because it could crank that out. And it also, they have good libraries that keep track. You don't have to track it all yourself, right? You just basically call the function and tell it to manage this, and it takes care of all the connecting of all the stuff. But yeah, that's I don't know. That's why I don't know if Hotkey has that built into AutoHotkey H or has a clear methodology for that. Maybe he does, but
he has attempted something that is usable, I'd say. I haven't done enough with it to really go into it deep, but I've done a little, and you can have multiple threads running, and you can kind of feel where it is and where. But if it really, if you had a big need like the one you said yourself, unless you had programmed everything out beforehand, making sure that each thread had been assigned whatever types of numbers and stuff like that, you would have a hard time of keeping track of it. But of course, a lot of what Hotkey did behind the scenes is the same as what you see in Python. It will keep track of all of what the objects and all of the different threads need. So in that way, it's thread safe, but still,
Cool. And then we talked a little bit about this last week. I think it was the speed, for the processing type of speed, right, of being able to burn through it. Why don't you elaborate more on that? That was with the driving car.
I remember back in the day seeing a lot of benchmarks with AutoHotkey and doing loops, and it has the built-in sleep that happens at a given interval, so as to not overburden people's computers. It set batch lines, and at one point it had one setting, and in newer times it has been changed a little bit. How I remember it is, after doing a specific amount of lines, it would always put in a sleep. And you didn't know about it. It just did it to always give the CPU a bit of
breather.
So it could process other things. And to people who were doing stuff where they wanted it to do stuff within 100 milliseconds or whatever, and they had, let's say, 20 lines, and for some reason they were measuring that loop or what it was, and it wasn't coming back with consistent timings. One time it took 120 milliseconds, and the next time it took 110, and then 130, and back and forth and back and forth. And removing that, because that's a setting you can simply remove, the amount of loops of calculations that AutoHotkey can do are in the millions within a second, and that's a good number, but it doesn't really compare to what you can do with some of the more in-depth languages.
The machine learning? Not machine learning, I'm sorry. The stuff that's actually running at the not code level.
Yeah,
processor
machine
level.
code,
Machine code. Thank you.
Each time someone does something that has to do with graphics or GDI plus or whatever it is, the last step you can do, at least with AutoHotkey, to optimize that piece of code is to convert it to machine code, and then use delcall to actually execute that code, because it is as close as you get to, I don't know, assembly or binary or whatever it is. And it's just the fastest way to actually make the computer understand what it is that you want it to do.
And help me understand this a little bit, because I think I get the grasp of this. I'm sure there's other reasons why some languages are faster than others, right? But what you just mentioned is, I think, one of the core ones of the further away from that assembly language or machine code language you get, the more interpretation to your code has to happen in order for the CPU to process it, right?
Yeah.
Which is why it slows down. And so kind of the way I think of it is, the easier it is for me to read this like human language, the more work has to be done by the computer to actually process it, and that, of course, will slow it down.
Yeah, and that's the same way I'm seeing it. AutoHotkey is, without me knowing exactly how it happens, but the interpreter, the AutoHotkey exit, actually goes in, interprets your script, and then has some kind of C++ code behind the scenes that are actually the thing doing what you told it to do in the script. So the script is not per se slow. It's still it's near C++ speed. It's just a matter of, let's say that Lexicos, who's the latest one, he made a function that did whatever he made it do, and we just call it with a command. But we actually don't know how many C++ lines it takes to do that thing.
Yeah.
And if you were instead doing it in C++, if the guy who made it, he put in an extra variable assignment, and he used that method over here instead of that one that does it 3 milliseconds faster with a million loops over that. So he had an extra assignment, and he had that thing that took 3 milliseconds or 3 petaflops or whatever a number would be that made sense there. Just gives the thing that we do with AutoHotkey that little extra bump, making it able to do just a million less than whatever C++ does. And C++ isn't optimized for doing whatever math, what it might be, calculations of one of the other, where other languages are optimized to do that exact thing. So most programmers end up saying that you need to use the right tool for the task.
Right.
And that's the same thing with programming languages. And for AutoHotkey, it's made in C++. And those limitations that C++ are just amplified a little bit for what we do with AutoHotkey. So if C++ isn't good for it, AutoHotkey is per definition not good for it.
Gotcha. Right. Yeah. And actually, when you were talking about it, it dawned on me also, is that what other programs, because I know other programs compared to AutoHotkey, when you go to compile something, it can take a while for it to compile it. Is it taking, like, Python kind of did this, but it wasn't as long as other languages. Is it taking, like, let's say the Python language and then converting that closer to a machine learning when you actually compile it? Is it writing it that way? It's been translated once, and then it can run at the closer to machine or assembly language, so it'd be faster?
Yeah, I'd guess that you could make a compiler that did that, and Python might be doing something like that. I'm not sure. I just know that with AutoHotkey, when we call it compiling, it's actually just bundling the AutoHotkey executable with the script and merging those two together into a single file. And each time you double click it, you're actually just passing the script as a parameter to the exit file. So the interpretation is still happening each time you actually execute the code. Gotcha. Whereas with a true compile, to how I understand it, you'll actually convert the the code that you made into something that's easier for the computer to understand, making it quicker. Yeah.
But that would explain why it actually takes a while, and because I never got that before of like, why for other programs does it take so long to compile things? But now that makes sense to me.
I know that Visual Studio and stuff like that, if you write it like this, it will have a lot of different things in the background that will go in and optimize on what you wrote to make that thing the most
efficient,
the fastest it can absolutely be from a compiling standpoint.
Yeah. Well, and we should point out also, I think maybe you mentioned this earlier, but for the stuff that AutoHotkey is used for, it's perfectly acceptable that it doesn't do all this stuff, because we're not trying to crunch 8 million things at one point in time. I mean, we're about being efficient in writing my code, right, and getting something to work quickly. Not, let me rephrase that. So I write it quickly and then it works. Not that I can use it on a million computers and it's going to be so fast. Right.
No, and the thing I remember at one point doing some stuff, and Jethro, who's an older user within the AutoHotkey community, at least way older than I was, and also more just better. Let's put it like that. And at one point, I had fallen under a small snippet of stuff you could do in Excel with putting values in ranges and stuff. And putting them in, was it ranges? I believe that you could actually pick and choose and put them in another type of object. And it made looking and searching and looping over very sporadic parts of an Excel file much quicker than it is to actually just move the range each time you did it.
Yeah.
And it made it so much quicker. And just to put it in, if a user had to do the same thing, he might have used all day on it. And with the correct methods, going from it taking the AutoHotkey script 5 minutes to do it, it came down to doing it in seconds, but still from the user using all day to 5 minutes.
Right.
And optimizing on that with that little snippet I'd found to make it into seconds. Might seem like something really interesting to me and Jethro, but to my task, the original task from taking hours to taking minutes was all I needed. But it was fun to make it even faster, but still.
Yeah, he helped me with one. I was trying to delete blank columns, so columns that had nothing in them. I wanted an easy way to delete them. And then he wrote it, and I'm looking at the code, and I'm like, all right, I don't follow this at all. But damn, it was fast. And I was able to adjust it to do rows too. But anyway, he was very good at stuff.
It's just interesting with speed, because of course AutoHotkey won't be used for something as automating self-driving cars and stuff like that, and it shouldn't be used for it either.
Right.
Again, that's the thing with the right tool for the right task.
But that's where it is important to evaluate what actually matters, right? And in most of our cases, it's how much time are we spending to write this thing, and how much is it going to get used. And if I can do something in 20 minutes that's going to save me a day's worth of work, damn straight, versus doing that in C, or Python or anything else, it might take me 2 days, and it's just not it may not be worth it. So it's how do you evaluate that, right?
Yeah, and I think that's worth having always kind of close to heart with something like AutoHotkey, because those of us who's been with it for long enough would like to be considered some kind of coder or script resource or whatever you would call that, instead of maybe being absolute programmers, because I've had a few discussions with people who absolutely had some kind of background within programming or coding in general, and they'll like, but the way you're doing that gives too much overheat or whatever it might be, and I'm really not sure what that is, but it was, and a bit of inefficient way of doing a thing where I would perhaps create an object to put values in,
Right.
whereas if I had instead used a specific command,
Yeah.
it was nice information per se, but using the object to split stuff or whatever it might have been made it much more visually pleasing and easy and rereadable.
Well, I was going to say easy to update later to go back in and see what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, the overheat had absolutely no
value. Overhead. Is that what you're saying?
Overhead.
Yeah.
Overhead.
I was hearing heat, but yeah.
Overheat.
Yeah.
I think I'm saying heat, but overhead. Overhead. That might be the right term.
Yeah. The amount of memory it's taking or
yeah, something like
resources.
that.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's just, to many of the people who are using AutoHotkey, I'm sure it's something where they're automating their own small task, and when they have done that for long enough, they get more and more tasks that may involve more users or more of the companies, whatever. And of course, when you build on stuff and it becomes either more important or used by many more people, it can become a thing to look out for. But with most of the scripts that we see, it shouldn't really matter that much, or that's my belief.
No, I agree. Yeah, but it also, I know we've talked this before, it explains it's on the skill set of the developer too, right? So AutoHotkey is great for noobs and for people who are, who play, but they're not necessarily programmers, right? Mm-hmm. But as you develop your skill even more, hey, doing something in Python, even though it might be a little more length of code, because you know it so well and you're a good programmer, it doesn't actually take you longer to do it, right? Which I think explains why we see a lot of people come into AutoHotkey, get their bones, and then actually end up leaving it after a while because they've moved on for whatever reason, right? But part of it is maybe they've found that, like, for their purposes, the stuff they're doing, and I think you have a really valid point, how many people or how much, process, I guess either way you could say it, it's let's say it's per year, how many times is this thing going to run through it per year, right? And that can be a factor of, it's in this program that does it over and over on one computer 1 billion times, or it's going to 1 million people and they're running it once, right? It's either way, that's a lot of loops or a lot of running, and so then optimization becomes more critical.
Yeah. And yeah, to me at least, I'd say if people are new and they're looking for something to learn, as someone who just wants to get their feet wet, it's okay to use AutoHotkey, but at some point you need to choose if you want to do something that becomes career-wise scripting programming thing. Yeah. You might want to switch. Right. That's up to you, of course, but to me, if you need something that's to help you get whatever you have on your table done, I don't see much need to actually change from AutoHotkey.
Right. Yeah. AutoHotkey can do it, but to your point, and we were talking about this earlier, of like getting a job, like just because you know AutoHotkey, not that many people are looking for AutoHotkey developers. Having said that, AutoHotkey can do an amazing amount of stuff like at your job, right? It's just, it doesn't necessarily, having it on your resume, it doesn't really help a lot. But of course, you could just put robotic process automation or something else of automation, and that'll still get people excited, right, and get you a job.
Yeah, because there's many other programs that does what AutoHotkey does in one way or the other, and some companies are investing in whatever type of thing that can automate small things that the programmers that they might have hired doesn't really see as maybe not worthy, but it might take them way too long to code all that's needed to handle Windows in different ways and stuff like that, where having either a dedicated program that says it does it or AutoHotkey that also does it, it really depends on both the company but also the person who is tasked with doing it. To me, it's weird that my company, I know they have GUI path, I think it is.
Oh, really?
Is not something that I have access to, but I know that the IT company has it. I saw it on one of their Scrum boards that someday I was passing through, and I was like, oh, so they have that, okay, but that's kind of weird because I know this open source thing over here that can do most of what I know the other thing can do. It's not my table, but still, to me, it's just we have something that can do most of what you're talking about. But again, that's what one of their people knew about, and that's what they've gone
with. Well, and because this got brought up in that interview with Tank, it's folds. As one is like those tools often have some sort of logging actions and account tracking and credentials built into it, right? But the second one, which is what actually cued me off of this when you just mentioned this, was I find it kind of ironic, is he said, and this is, of course, his job is going in and using, I think it's Automate Anywhere, not GUI Path or Blue Prism, but he goes and installs it, and he's getting paid a ton of money, and companies pay them a ton of money, come in there and automate processes, but they are required to use a program. One is for the log tracking and stuff I just mentioned, but the second one, which is the more critical one, was he said they have to have a program that you can use drag and drop because the company is going to be the one that's maintaining it. And they don't have programmers, right, that actually can do it. But if you make it in a user, a drag and drop GUI interface and it's that simple, then they can train someone to be able to work in that environment, right? And that's one of the reasons it's kind of ironic, right? Because I think AutoHotkey, Tank mentioned it. He's like, it can do a lot more than some of these other ones, but it requires you actually do coding, right? Not that you drag a box in here and choose from a list of things, right?
Yeah, and that's probably why people like us that are kind of fanboys of AutoHotkey, we are like, why use that? This one here, I know this one. It's way more powerful, but the learning curve to actually get there is also higher. Yeah. And I've at least in recent years kind of put AutoHotkey where it probably belongs. I don't know for sure, but it is a scripting language, and I find it okay to put those in between those drag and drops things that you can buy and macro recorders. Then scripting languages of varying degree come in there, and maybe with Python closest to an actual programming language, or most people would say that it is a programming language, but it is still a scripting language with a lot of users and a lot of baggers. So fair enough, you can do, but again, if you can do it, I'm oversimplifying. If you can do it with Python, you could probably, with the right developer, do the same thing with AutoHotkey. I'm kind of keeping that one. Don't quote me on that, but still, it's kind of my opinion. If you use Python to do it in Windows, you could just as easily, or maybe easier. I don't know if that's a word, but yeah.
Having said that, the difference also being Python is cross-platform, right? So,
exactly.
Yeah, and it does open up doors there.
But Python is cross-platform because their compiler for Python is made to be cross-platform. That's the thing. It's still just a scripting language where the developers behind Python, actually made it cross-platform. That's the thing. You could do the same thing. You could make an interpreter for AutoHotkey scripts that would make it work on a Mac. If someone went in and said, what am I actually compiling this for? Is it for Windows or is it for Mac? Then I'll use this one, and it will. But you need someone to go in and entirely rewrite all of the interpreter, because you need to change all of the commands, and it's just a time-intensive task.
I'll start that tomorrow. Yeah.
But yeah, Ion AHK which I believe it
Oh, right.
was,
Yeah.
that was made in a language that's actually cross-platform, could, within reason, actually make executables that were cross-platform. So it's not impossible, but it's just who within the AutoHotkey community is willing to actually do it.
Yeah. The next one, which actually I think brings us back a little bit with the AutoHotkey H, to me is the security / the ability to easily decompile the normal AutoHotkey L. Right, is if you're trying to create a software program that you don't want other people to easily peek into, right? AutoHotkey is not the tool for you.
No, that's the thing with compiling it. You're actually changing it into something else. Or you're not doing that with AutoHotkey.
Oh, that makes so much sense now. Yeah. Which how you explain when AutoHotkey gets compiled, it's just basically combining the combat, but it's not embedding it. It's not rewriting the code.
No.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah.
And of course, I at one point had one back engineer something else for me, and it didn't seem at my level very easily achievable, but the person did it within hours. So, and I'm pretty sure he didn't actually use those hours on doing it. But yeah, it's still doable. It's just, as many people, or at least older users within AutoHotkey has said, is yeah, we can try, but we won't actually keep it hidden anyway from people who really want it. So it's again, it's a matter of how much effort do you want to put into hiding it, when all, and that's the thing, when all of what we do needs to be open source and readably available. So anybody who wanted to make a decompiler could do it with minimal work. So I understand why people who are open source at heart don't want to use their time on making something that makes it closed source when they actually need to put everything they do out in the open anyway. Yeah.
I was going to say, but the other critical thing is there is no perfect language that is 100% crack proof, right? No. It's just AutoHotkey happens to be very easy to peek under the hood. Others are much harder, but you can still, if you apply yourself, right? But that's where, to me, we know from our experiences, you and I, right? The average person that's going to get this isn't going to even understand how to even look to see if it's built in AutoHotkey and what they're doing with it, right? The fear would be, let's say you and I I'm your evil twin, or I'm your antagonist. I know you wrote this saying, I can go find it, I can get the source code, and then I can go republish it as my own code, right? Under its own compiled name and something else. That's, I think, the true danger. And it's not that the average person is going to go look at your code. It's that they're going to steal it and then resell it. Or just make it public.
The issue, and I still have thoughts of that matter, because it's just a little bit sad that it's as easy as it is, but it only becomes sad as soon as you have something that becomes of value to you.
Right.
And the thing, just a moment ago, I got this idea that any book you buy, you could easily just copy it and rebrand it and sell it. And some kind of person could find out, tell the right people, and that could sue you in some way. And you could probably, if you can in a meaningful way prove that the code was yours originally, do the same thing. The issue with software in general is just that it's not really out in the open. It's not something that's shared. So if someone stole my code, if you stole my code and sold it to someone else with rebranding and stuff like that, how am I supposed to find out?
Sure. Yeah.
It's not really on the shelf of any store. It's not something that I'll see in a cafe on people sitting there and reading a book that has the exact same name as mine or whatever it might be. It's really hard to actually find out that someone has stolen your code. And that's,
Absolutely.
to me at least, why I would have loved if AutoHotkey code was a little bit harder to get at. And there really isn't any really good, easy way of making sure that nobody gets at your code.
Yeah. But we did that webinar with Hotkey and showing, hey, you can take it, get it compiled into AutoHotkey H without compile. I mean, you can go create your own identifier, right? And that was really, for me, that was really complicated.
Yeah.
And then that way you could actually go decompile your own thing, right? Or you can just take his default, which I think he created a random generator, and then you can't go peek it open again, but neither can anybody else. And it's like, hey, you know what? That was easy, if I remember right.
Yeah.
That was much easier.
That was simple enough, at least.
Yeah.
And he had the one where he was just compressing it, like mpress and stuff. It was using gzip or something like that. I can't remember the exact name, where it was just compressing the code, and that also obscured that easily readable thing. But it was still, that was decompilable because it was just a matter of actually deflating it and knowing which compression was used.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were those three levels of the one where you went in, made your own passwords, all of that stuff, made sure that you had your own tokens, and then compiled it. And it wasn't impossible, perhaps, to decompile, but it was at least so hard that nobody would really wanna try without the password. So you could decompile it. That's one thing. But the next one was the one you talked about, where it wasn't really decompilable because random, but it might have been doable, but still. And then you had the last one where it was simple. You could do it with almost anything, and it was just compressing it. And the one who wanted to decompile it just needed to figure out the compression level or whatever. Yeah. It was interesting to see that it could be done in a way that was doable.
Yeah. And then we had also chatted about using it for big data and huge data files. I think part of that was what we've already discussed is just the efficiency of it, right? But it's also, I think, and I know you can do things in a certain way in AutoHotkey if you program better to not get locked up with at a certain amount of megs, of RAM, because like with there are ways to work around it where you do, instead of reading the entire file at one time, you read line by line and then you do stuff with it, right? And that'll keep your overall overhead lower. But was there anything else on that one that you had to bring up?
I don't remember the exact things that really limits it, but if I do remember something, I think that some of it comes with, again, the interpreter, how they take some predetermined things, and there are some limitations at the forefront of Windows, where Windows would expect a file to be no less than this, or a function that was made at one point doing the program, the coding of Windows at whatever different types of levels would expect that a file wouldn't exceed a specific size. And those are the limitations that we are kind of, when you begin using huge things today, those limitations are there at different points, and you can work around them.
Yeah.
But again, it's the matter of how often is that a need compared to
Right.
how much more bloating will the exit actually become to allow for it? Yeah.
That reminds me of the comment which you and I discussed like a month ago. But on Reddit, I someone had posted, and they were sincere, right? They weren't trying to be mean about AutoHotkey, but I had posted something about I think it was our webinar on web scraping. And someone said, like, not to be mean, but why in the world would anybody use AutoHotkey for web scraping, right? Yeah. And part of the answer is, I know AutoHotkey, right? Yeah. It's like, it's not necessarily the perfect job for it, but should I really go out and hire someone that's an expert in another language, or go and study and learn a whole nother language when it's not the most efficient, but I can still get it done in this language that I happen to know, right? I mean, yeah, come on.
Again, to me, it often sums down to, if it's something that's already on my table, yeah, or if it's someone who I might know or who asks me, can this be done? Because they have the task on their table, for whatever reason they might have that. Often the scope of these needs are limited. Nobody is really trying to go out and grab half the internet's worth of websites like a Google bot or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
No, they have, let's say, a single domain or a few where they want to get some specific pages or information from that page and that page. And there might be a few hundred pages that they want a value for, or maybe even 1,000, mm-hmm, where it's easily, it's doable just fine without a hotkey. There's no reason why you would have to actually go out and find a different tool for doing that amount of web scraping, because AutoHotkey has all of the needed parts to be able to go to, grab, log in, keep your credentials, whatever you need to do with any kind of website like that, and bring back the information and let you process it in the way that you need. Whereas, okay, if you want to go out and grab 1,000 RSS feeds every hour to kind of make some kind of statistic of whatever it might be over the period of a month, AutoHotkey might not be the tool for that. But again, you probably want to have it on a server anyway. So again,
right, yeah, right. The other thing that I think, I'm very curious, right? Because I used Python, this is years ago, for web scraping, but I didn't do a lot in it. But I did enough. But, nowadays, often we run into those event listeners and other things that, of course, are harder to web scrape at least with AutoHotkey, right? Mm-hmm. I'm curious in Python, when you run into things like that, how do you, in other languages, is there easy ways to deal with some of the stuff? Because for me in AutoHotkey, I can easily switch over and say, oh, just look for this image on the screen and freaking send a mouse click there, right? I can do that in no time. It's not the most efficient, but you know what? It sometimes it works and it's so easy, and it's built in AutoHotkey, right? I can easily switch between them, the approaches between that and COM. But I'm curious.
I think that most scrapers or bots or spiders or whatever they're called, all of those different things, they're kind of headless.
Yep.
They don't actually have any way to render what they see. They interpret everything they get from the server when they visit whatever URL they're visiting. And some of them can also handle events and trigger them and stuff like that, depending on their need. But again, most of the time, web scraping, I'm not sure that you'd have a need for actually triggering events. Then you're probably doing something
interactive with the...
Yeah, and it's meant to be for a user. And again, AutoHotkey to me is kind of that layer between the user and the actual programming code, where if I were to learn a true programming language, it would be to build something, not to automate something. Because at least to me, without a hotkey, I'm capable of automating almost anything I can imagine within the scope of Windows. Whereas if I wanted to make an app or a tool that people were to use on different multiple platforms, I'd go some other route for that. And that's where I'm seeing a bit of a limitation on AutoHotkey being that single platform thing, because people are on so many different devices today. So even if you had a need for handling very big data, AutoHotkey can probably do it within some constraints, as long as it's stuff that's available on Windows. So really comparing big data to the internet, that is probably outside the scope of what you would use AutoHotkey for.
And then the last, at least that we had written down, was the math-intensive type work. Is that in? Excuse me. Is that also just more that some languages are specifically designed to be better at crunching math, and AutoHotkey is not one of those?
Yeah, and I think that's one of those where I've never really studied it, but as you just said yourself, some languages seem to be inclined to be better at that, or faster at that, or just able to handle it in some better way. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but to me, if I'm just thinking of giving AutoHotkey an expression, I believe there is a max length to what AutoHotkey normally would accept an expression to be. But the speed of how quickly it actually interprets whatever math thing that you'd ask, I'm not sure how slow it is compared to other things. Again, it should have the C++ speed, or at least very, very close to that. And to me, that just doesn't sound like something that's really slow at math. But again, if you do it a trillion times,
that's right.
Compared to this one that's made for that specific thing, okay, yeah, C++ might lose out. So yeah.
Yeah.
And
cool. Do we have anything else of?
No, I think we've covered it pretty well, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and we're picking on AutoHotkey because it's just good to know when you should think of other things. But we both, and neither of us love AutoHotkey as a syntax language, right? It's a great tool that's easy to use and to do a lot of stuff.
If let's say we had learned originally a strong type language, where you needed to declare everything beforehand, and there was no wiggle room to do anything in two ways or whatever, we might have picked on that more. But to us,
that's a style type issue, right?
Yeah,
that's a good point. That's some of the big complaints of people who, like in Python, there's one way to do a loop and there's one way to do this, and they like it. That's one of their they stress that as a big benefit, and I agree. After you get used to it, it is nice because you learn it one way. But
I'm totally with and that's maybe also one of the things for AutoHotkey. I think not many people are collaborating on scripts. It is, at least from my experience, much a single man, single project type thing. So the need, or maybe it's because, or that's an effect of it, because I don't need to declare everything in the beginning. Someone who's reading my stuff afterwards, or if someone wanted to extend my stuff, they might actually be at a disadvantage, whereas stronger type languages will give you a bit more there. But
I hadn't thought about that as being a clue as to what to expect. Here's all my variables defined up here. I know what to, it's being used in the code. Yeah. Because otherwise you got to hunt. Actually, I was working on something with Maastricht this morning, and he had, I had the goal, and then he wrote it, and then I was trying to tweak it, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't even know where to begin. Like, it's so intricate, and he doesn't, I love him to death, but he doesn't annotate anything. So trying to find where anything is, I'm like, wow, I got to read through this, and he writes, for me, a very advanced code, so it was tough. But had those all been defined and annotated, which of course the annotating is just a habit, right?
Yeah. That's just an extra effect. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been, I think, a good chat. Hopefully people didn't get too bored. And
that's cool.
yeah. All right. Well, we'll see you next week.
Yeah. Bye.